He rose from a small island nobody cared about and nearly conquered all of Europe. He wasn't born a king. He made himself one. Napoleon Bonaparte, a man who believed destiny could be engineered. But history had other plans. This is not just the story of a general. It's the anatomy of ambition. How one human mind tried to control the world and lost everything in the process. 1769 Corsica, a rugged island in the Mediterranean, newly conquered by France. A boy is born into a modest family. Napoleon Bonaparte. Outsider. Poor. Mocked for his accent when he's sent to study in mainland France. But there's something unusual about him. He reads history obsessively. Alexander, Caesar, Hannibal. He doesn't just admire them, he studies how they thought. By 16, he's already convinced that he's destined for greatness. But destiny, he learns, has no sympathy for the poor. France is collapsing into revolution, chaos, blood, and opportunity. The French Revolution tears down kings and crowns. The old order burns, and in the smoke, ambitious men rise. Napoleon, now a young artillery officer, sees what others don't. He sees power. At Toulon, he uses precise mathematical strategy to defeat royalist forces. A nobody becomes a national hero overnight. His name spreads through Paris, the Corsican genius. He's promoted, then arrested, then promoted again. A cycle that defines the revolution itself. But he plays it like a master. He aligns himself with the victors of every new phase until France needs him more than he needs France. The Italian campaign. France is broke. Soldiers are starving. Napoleon takes command and rewrites warfare. He moves fast. He attacks weak points, splits armies, and wins before his enemies even understand his plan. Speed, surprise, morale. He turns ragged men into believers. At 27, he conquers Italy, not just with cannons, but with words. His soldiers begin to worship him. Europe begins to fear him. And back in Paris, people begin to depend on him. That's when ambition becomes addiction. 1804. Notre Dame Cathedral. Napoleon crowns himself emperor, snatching the crown from the Pope's hands. It's more than symbolism. It's rebellion against fate itself. He reforms France, education, law, finance. Everything becomes efficient, logical, his. He abolishes privilege, rewards merit, and creates the Napoleonic Code that still shapes modern law. But every reform carries a shadow. The man who once fought for liberty now demands obedience. He controls newspapers, silences dissent, and builds a myth of perfection around himself. His empire expands. Italy, Germany, Spain, Austria, until almost all of Europe bows. Except one. Britain. 1812. Napoleon commands the largest army ever assembled in Europe, 600,000 men. He calls it the Grand Armée, his target, Russia. He believes one more victory will seal his legacy forever. But Russia is not Europe. It's endless, cold, and patient. He captures Moscow, only to find it burning, abandoned, useless. Winter arrives early. Food runs out. Horses collapse. Frostbite eats through the flesh of soldiers who once shouted his name. Out of 600,000, barely 100,000 return. Napoleon rides in silence. For the first time, he knows. He's mortal. 1815. After exile on Elba, he returns for one last gamble, the 100 Days. France welcomes him back. Old soldiers cry, "Vive l'Empereur!" For a moment, the old fire burns again. But Europe unites. Britain, Prussia, Austria, Russia, everyone wants him gone. At Waterloo, the rain falls heavy. Cannons sink into the mud. His genius depends on timing, and timing betrays him. The Prussians arrive. The French line breaks. Napoleon watches the impossible happen. Defeat. Waterloo isn't just the end of an army, it's the end of an idea, that one man could outthink destiny. Exiled again, this time to St. Helena, a rock in the Atlantic, far from Europe. No armies, no applause, just the sound of waves hitting stone. He writes his memoirs, rewrites his memories, and convinces himself he was always right. He speaks to the few who will listen. I wanted peace, but I was forced into war. In the end, he dies in isolation. No throne, no soldiers, no empire. Only his words remain. Napoleon's empire vanished, but his ideas didn't. His code became the basis for modern law. His merit-based system shaped modern bureaucracy. His wars redrew Europe's borders for a century. He changed how leaders think, how generals fight, and how ambition is judged. He made the world both more modern and more dangerous. History remembers him not as a hero or villain, but as a mirror, reflecting humanity's eternal hunger for control. Because Napoleon wasn't just a man, he was what happens when intelligence meets obsession, and power meets no limits. Empires fall, legends don't.